the lead line, reminding you of your personal genius and how you think in order to actualize what you desire.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here post celebration of Mother's Day and reminder of the importance of all of us as leaders, leading developing children, leading developing families, leading more broadly in businesses, public, private, small, large, corporate settings, municipalities, nonprofit, community based organizations, leadership. When I was thinking about this today's broadcast, thinking about our guest and humbled by her uh, absolute humility. And the topic we have today is why the law? Why not the law? She is a accomplished attorney and definitely an effective leader. Something came to mind. There's a remarkable book that came out some years ago called The Color of Law. Feels like it just came out yesterday. And all of us, without exception, would benefit from reading it. And I remember Bill Gates' statement in here where he says, a good book I read recently is The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. I've been trying to learn more about the forces preventing economic mobility in the United States. And it helped me understand the role federal policies have played in creating racial segregation in American cities. So the color of law is replete with a lot of rich content based upon facts. I mean, actual facts based upon research so that we could understand why certain set of conditions that affect Blacks across the country, stifling, undermining, or explaining part of why limited economic mobility for a large segment of the population. And when one writes a book like The Color of Law, or one engages in preparation for transactions like litigators, like Hannah Stitt does, you have to have a clear intent to come up with data that reflects the integrity of the process. And that is what humbles me in terms of sharing the following bio on Hannah, attorney Stitt. She's an intellectual property attorney based in San Francisco, California, with Tectonic LLP. She resolves disputes for owners and executives related to brands, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, consumer protection, and privacy in California state and federal courts, and before the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board. Now, this attorney has served cannabis industry clients since before the regulated market emerged within California. And over the years, as the industry grew, her legal practices transformed from the transactional and compliance work into intellectual property and business litigation. Attorney Stitt has been an essential member of the International Cannabis Bar Association's ethics committee since 2018. I'm trying to make it longer than it has been. Probably the work feels like it's been longer than 2018. Her advice and counsel have shaped the market. She instructs other attorneys on how to provide services to the cannabis industry without jeopardizing their law practices. And she developed policies in individual jurisdictions designed to protect attorneys serving the industry. Now, she provides pro bono and low bono legal services, and they're integral part of her law practice. From 2016 through last year, she was a leader with the prisoner Advocacy Network, otherwise known as PAN, a project of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. And as a PAN advocate, she practiced administrative law to assist California prisoners to uphold their civil rights. She attended the University of California, Davis, as one of my niece and one of my nephew-in-laws, and for her undergraduate education, and then earned both a religious studies and film studies degrees. She graduated from UC Hastings College of Law in 2015 with a concentration in intellectual property law. She's been named Northern California Rising Star by her colleagues in the legal profession continuously since 2019. Now, so that you understand the context, less than 2.5% of all lawyers are named to the Rising Stars list. Without further ado, I want to ask Jethro if he could bring this remarkable, humble attorney leader to the screen. Thank you for joining us today. Hannah, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here speaking with you and your audience today.
Thank you. And my apologies for taking so long to read your bio, yet I wanted to read all of it
Oh,
so
no.
that the audience gets a sense of who you are.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for
And it's
taking
only
that
the tip of
time.
the iceberg because you're more than just an attorney and you're a significant impact or make significant impact in that particular industry that affects the rest of us. You're also a wife and you're much more. You're a good friend and you can share a little bit of that as we talk more about your leadership mindset, and why excellence is so central to what you do. And you're also a mom of a dog, right?
Yes. Yes. And a baby and a
Oh, and
person.
a baby. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
What's your baby's name?
Fiona.
Oh, how beautiful. I should know that. I know your dog's name, Argos, but I didn't know your daughter's name.
Yeah,
So,
I'm new at parenting, so I haven't worked
um,
in as seamlessly. I've been a dog mom longer than a human
okay.
mom.
Well, congratulations on being a
Thank
mom.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. So Mother's Day, I'm sure, was especially special for you
It
this year.
was. It
Yeah.
was.
How old is she?
She just turned, she's 15 months. We're still in the months way of
Um,
measuring her life. Soon we'll
yeah,
graduate into
that
years,
is
I think.
awesome. Beautiful.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
So what you do is also leadership for her.
Yes.
If you were to share something about yourself that others would not know because they can't find it on social media, what would that be so that we gain a little bit more insight into you beyond your being, I'm sure, a remarkable mom, definitely a beautiful wife, and and an attorney.
Well, I'm kind of glad that we had the moment about Fiona because I think a good fun fact about me is that I really enjoy the movie Shrek. And
Ah.
everyone says Fiona's a beautiful name, and I love it. And they're like, where'd you get that? And I'm like, I'm not gonna lie, I was looking at a list of names and I saw Fiona, but also I have a strong affinity for Princess Fiona from Shrek.
Oh, that is so funny. I
I
love it.
know, right? Like it was just when that movie came out and the princess turned into an ogre and got married and had a happy life, I was like, wow, that's really a cool princess to be like. So part of my child's namesake, I think, is a salute to Shrek. So I'm
I
a big
love that.
fan.
I love that. I love that. Well, we're going to talk about why law and why not law. And I know we had a discussion recently, and you shared some things. I'm just going to ask you a broader question. You are a lawyer to make a change, correct?
Yes, that's how I've been in my practice. I think it's been a thread across the years.
Hmm. If you were to say that there was something that compelled you to take your undergraduate focus and shift it and go into law school, what was that? What prompted you to go into law?
I think I actually, I'm, this is just, a fact of my life is that I think in high school I took a aptitude test, or maybe it was even middle school. And I got two possible pathways that the results thought were pretty clear. One of them was to become a lawyer, and the other was to become a movie director. So when I got to college and, you start trying out classes, seeing what'll stick. I think I had originally wanted to do something like biology as a major, but I wasn't super good at the underlying science that you need to get through in order to have, a full biology major or minor. So I fell into some of the cultural classes, and religious studies is one of those ones that integrates history, sociology, and technology in a way, because technology will push politics for sure. All this kind of stuff comes together in a religious studies degree. So when I was in undergrad, planning to go to law school, I wanted to choose something that would speak to history, politics, and English, because those were pretty common majors for pre-law. UC Davis doesn't have a pre-law program, or at least it didn't when I was there. And then film studies is actually not, it may seem as an interesting choice, but it actually isn't very far apart from a religious studies degree. And it's religious studies, not theology, in case anyone in the audience is not aware of the difference. Religious studies is a critical look at multiple types of religions and religions as structures, versus theology would be training inside of a single religion, maybe to become a pastor or other type of role. And film studies and religious studies are actually both very new disciplines, which maybe if you've looked at my bio, you're not surprised by, because I'm into new emerging markets. So I was like, okay, this is a fun space for me to be in, where we're looking at how systems are made and what motivates people to do things over time. And that happens in our film. Our films are a great way to look at what was going on in a culture at the time it was written or produced. So that's the kind of similar when you think about it like that.
And so, related to that original question, why do you feel compelled to make a difference in the area of law, especially in the area of whether it's cannabis or related
I feel like
areas?
I don't understand why I feel compelled, but I do feel compelled. I think it's something a bit innate. And the reason I think I'm drawn to law as a way to do it is really speaking. This is something that I think I've been able to look at my life in retrospect and come up with an answer that makes sense. I don't think I was in the moment at any one time in my education going like, this is why I'm going to be a lawyer. But looking back, I think being a lawyer is actually a pretty powerful position inside of our culture. There's a presumption that you are, putting aside the way that people sometimes joke and feel about attorneys, the way that the law is set up itself, there's a presumption that once you've become a licensed officer in any state in the US, that when you say a thing to the court, that you're bringing honesty with you to that conversation. And it's a way to interact with the system in a position where the system is actually set up to not be against you. Like, the laws are not set up so that lawyers are going to jail, right? These kinds of things. This is what I mean when I'm saying it's a powerful position in our culture. And so with this compulsion to make changes in our society, hopefully for the better, everybody's got what they think is the right thing to do. And so I'm no different from that. Hopefully the things that I've been working on are actually worthy of making change and being bigger spaces in our culture. I think so, but not everybody agrees. So I think that being a lawyer and learning how the system works and learning how laws are made and what your tools are for changing the laws I think I was drawn to this as a setting to be able to make changes in the direction that I think our culture should be going in a meaningful way. And I think there are totally a lot of other ways to do it too. You could be an amazing author and you could capture people's minds and hearts and through a story. But for me, the law, I think I was drawn to it as a way that I felt like, okay, this is a safe place from which to say this is not, the status quo is not working. It doesn't, as opposed to being outside the system and saying it and then not having the protections of like, you could just be put in jail if you were protesting in the wrong place, those kinds of things. It's when you're doing it through the law as an officer of the law, there's a little bit less presumption that it'll be as dangerous as if you're outside of the system trying to make those changes.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And if I were to summarize it one way, you wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to influence in a significant way without having the negative consequences of doing what you believe to be the right thing.
Exactly. I love it. Great summation.
And when I think about you, and I think about, correct me if I'm wrong, you were the first in your family to go to college, correct?
Yes, to complete
Uh,
college. Yeah.
to complete college. And so, was there something about your upbringing, your family, the elders around you that encouraged you to go forward to completion, and thus then inspired you to go into an area of law that is nascent, if you will, like cannabis,
Mhm.
like ensuring that appropriate support are provided to small and large business owners, and that the actual policies that are being developed serve the greatest good?
I think so. Not necessarily in a clear, outspoken way where everybody is communicating that we are doing XYZ actions to improve our own professions. But I think that both of my parents, even though they didn't, both of them started a little bit of college but never went to completion of it. Um, Watching them and the different kinds of roles that they had for employment over the years, it was a way, like they were continually showing with their actions that it's important to choose something for yourself that not only makes a livelihood for you, because we all need to make money, but does it in a way that you can feel good about what you're doing and possibly helping other people too. For example, my mom she's currently a realtor, but for many years she worked for the American Heart Association. So I saw her taking new research and figuring out how to communicate it to people about like how long you should be performing CPR and how to perform CPR and why it was important for you to eat healthy so that your heart would be healthy. And my dad, his career that he retired from, it was a rescue captain in San Francisco in the paramedic department.
Mhm.
So for him, that was a leadership example that is, he's high up in the organization, but also having his stories with just like what he would be doing during the day and the challenges that he would share with us. It was clear from his actions that he's being a leader, but he's also being a leader inside of an organization in a city that is a leading city in his field for the world. So a lot of demonstrating, not necessarily spoken like we are leaders, but a lot of
Mhm.
seeing that they're being
Yeah.
leaders, and that's a valuable thing to be.
And that's a testament to really effective leaders. They don't talk about it, they just do. And
Exactly.
you watch their actions. And quite frankly, for folks who don't know, our children, our nieces, our nephews, our godchildren, all children, they're looking at what we do, and they less pay attention to what we say until we demonstrate incongruency. Then they're like, really? You say I'm to do this, and yet you're doing something quite different. And so kudos to your parents for choosing to lead by example. Yeah,
Yes.
proud of both of them.
And
Yeah.
then the element of your question, speaking to the nascency of the markets that I'm interested in now, I think both my parents, ironically, I think being a paramedic is kind of a new profession as far as
Mhm,
professions go, only a couple hundred years.
mhm,
And both of them were in organizations that were highly valuing research. And what that translates to for me is that if you value research and then the goal is to take research and take action off that research and improve systems, both of them were all the time in situations where they were improving
mm,
systems. And so for me, as a takeaway, I'm like, oh, this is a new system. Like maybe we can go in there and tweak a little bit and make sure it's running efficiently or as efficiently as it can be and it has its goals clear, things like that. It's always a willingness to take in new information and then change your action. And that's something that is not present across every single profession. Like, for instance, I'm thinking accounting doesn't do a lot of, not taking in a lot of new information in accounting and updating accounting systems constantly. But there are other areas where it's very common. So I think that might have been another example that I absorbed from seeing them work.
yeah. Hmm. How do you experience clients? And I'm sure you have diverse clients, young and old, experienced, unexperienced, and or I should say, inexperienced and very experienced in their respective businesses. How do you help them gain clarity about the law? Because I
Mm.
think there's an assumption that we all know the law, the purpose of the law, and that assumption is ubiquitous. And yet when it comes down to it, many of us don't even understand the purpose of law. Yes, we think it's to protect and it's to ensure consistency. It's to ensure, some level of core values across the country and on and on. And yet, at the end of the day, when you ask someone, and depending upon who they are and their own perception of the historical consequences of laws, they'll have different definitions or reasons for the purpose of law. How do you deal with that with your clients in order to help them get to a place where it's a win for them?
Mhm. That's a great question. I think the first thing that I have to do is figure out where my client is on the sophistication scale, or you would call it a pendulum. Depending on the level of sophistication that the client brings just generally to the table. And that doesn't mean necessarily that they are unable to grasp like very complex things, so much as how many exposure points have they had to a certain area of law, perhaps would be a good way to talk about it. And so once that's gauged, that kind of gives me an idea of how to communicate and what to focus on. I think a large part of the work that I do in the cannabis industry, if I'm working with somebody who is, for example, a cannabis cultivator or a farmer, they may not have as much experience in traditional business practices. A lot of that is because if you have been growing cannabis for 20, 30 years, then that means probably most of that time period you were operating inside of an illegal landscape where it was just illegal in California, or not quasi legal in California, but definitely illegal on the federal level. And
Mhm.
so when there's a lot of pressure from, and this is where politics comes into it, when the politics at the federal level is encouraging law enforcement in the states to go after, for example, cannabis cultivators, then there's all these incentives for the person to not keep their books written. Because if you've got a written book and someone comes in and they bust you, then there you go. You've got a whole bunch of written evidence against you, right? So when I'm gauging people's level of sophistication and exposure to traditional business methods, that can be a place where it helps me identify like how granular do I need to go in explaining like where their rights are and how they protect their rights. I think I got a little bit away from the question there when I'm coming back around to it, but
Yeah, you're on it. You're on
I'm
it.
on it. Okay, okay.
Mhm.
So once I do that kind of thing, then it gets to be just making sure that I can draw nice, I guess sound bites is a way to describe it, where like, what can I say in the fewest words to reach the most people to describe a thing? So oftentimes concepts that I've been talking about for years, it's like, oh, someone said that perfectly. I'm going to put that in my pocket and say it next time. And it's just kind of tweaking the message to find that really clear common denominator, that of information that works across all different levels of client sophistication. And
Understand.
yeah, and that's kind of like across all the different areas of law. It depends
Yeah.
on the specific legal question, but generally it's just trying to find that medium space and also not take too long to do it, right? Because nobody wants to pay me forever to talk about something. They're like, get it done quickly, please. I don't want to go into our like half-hour charge or something like that. So,
Yeah, and that's the other question, and I'm not certain I'm going to articulate it clear enough. And that is, you've got a client who has a need, and the efficiency of getting to the answers that they need in order to decide to leverage you. Uh, there's another question, so I'll ask it later if it's helpful. But
okay.
the next question I have that I think is more relevant and the audience will appreciate is, what is it about intellectual property law that compelled you to lead within this space?
Um, I think this is actually another way of asking the earlier question about like why the law, which is great because this
Mhm,
is our topic today.
mhm,
For me, that safety in choosing to be a lawyer and from a position of power inside the system to question the system. When I'm looking at intellectual property, it's for me it's interesting. Is like it's oftentimes like art, software. These things are going to be intellectual property world that we're analyzing them from a legal perspective. So I'm drawn to the newness of the tech, I think, and the prettiness, interestingness of the art that might come up. So that's one aspect. But then on the harkening back to how systems work, like it is property. I'm practicing in a property field, and property for the United States, we inherited our legal system from the English, And the English, their property laws have been in place since William the Conqueror. So that's more than 2,000 years that we've had written laws about property. So it's the intersection for me of these new emerging markets are usually in the intellectual property space, but also it's the very decided area of law because it has to do with property. So it's both a place that there's clear answers to questions oftentimes because the law has been built out over thousands of years. So there's not always going to be a new interesting typeface. Oftentimes it's like, okay, well, here's a new piece of technology. How can we just make an analogy to something that already exists? Because we've already defined and answered lots of questions with the law inside of that narrow space. So it's a place where I can be doing new and exciting things, but have the comfort of knowing that like I can find answers for clients because it's actually about property law. It's not really as unknown as something might feel once you figure out.
Even in the cannabis industry, the same thing.
In the cannabis industry, the intersection with cannabis for me and intellectual property started because of federal illegality. So intellectual property laws are protected by the Constitution. It is the patent and trademark system is actually written out into the Constitution. So those are really strong federal rights. And with cannabis companies, we know that federal rights are often not available to them. But your intellectual property is not actually an illegal asset because it's just the branding that's surrounding an illegal product. So when I was first getting interested in the cannabis industry, I was really aware of the fact that most of the most valuable assets that most cannabis companies have is really their brand, because the federal government can't come in and take away your brand. And you can actually get federal rights for your brand, even though it's an illegal product. So it was an entranceway into this industry that was exciting and interesting from a business perspective. And it was like very nicely tied back to what I felt comfortable in the law, which is property laws. And it was, also pretty cool to have cannabis branding. And then on the flip side of that coin is that I do, from an activist standpoint, think that it's important for businesses to be able to have clear, articulable assets for themselves. It allows you to get investment. It allows you to maybe try to figure out the value of your business compared to other brands in a similar space. It's very difficult to value a cannabis company these days because there's just not there are a lot of them, but it's not like housing market. It's not like you can go on the MLS and be like, okay, well, the house on the street sold for this, so my cannabis brand must be similar to this other one down the street. So that's not really available right now. So intellectual property assets is a place that people can actually try to figure out like how well they're doing. And then also like if you have the way that our system works property wise, if the federal government has given you a property right, it's really difficult for the federal government to take it back again. Like once you've had it granted, that's pretty powerful stuff. It's not like end all be all. You still have to probably go to court and argue about it, but generally once a right is granted, it's just that much harder for the government to take it away. So it was this interesting space where it was like it scratches my intellectual itch. It's a cool way for companies that I was really interested in being more successful and growing the industry. It was a way that I could be like, hey, you guys have these assets. Did you know that you have these assets? You should try to cultivate this and make sure that it's growing and that you've got it as something that on the books is something that's really valuable for you as a company. So that's probably the intersection there.
Cool. I think you're fascinating because on the one hand, you're an attorney in a system that's pretty structured and an old system with some new aspects, but for the most part, pretty structured, right? Pretty well regulated, but internally. And on the other hand, you're an activist. You're very civic minded, and you have a history of actively influencing policy and actually helping to create policy. There has to be some challenges there.
For
And
sure.
I don't mean challenges in that they're barriers, but challenges that may cause you to lean in even more and want to do more. Can you describe that, the how you balance that out as someone who's seeking to be very time sensitive and efficient in getting results, and yet dealing with the system that is highly fixed, if you will, and not so malleable. You can't change it so easily. and then really focusing in on change in profound ways.
Yes, I think that I'm not always succeeding at the balance, I'll be honest. And I'm starting to suspect that it is not really possible to feel balanced most of the time. So, I could be
Mm.
wrong, but I'm somehow made more hopeful by the idea that it's just not easy. Um, I think that I'm naturally a persistent person. I think if you asked a bunch of people one thing about me, they'd be like, persistent seems like it fits well. So persistence is useful when you're up against the machine because you need it. But the resilience part is what I think you're asking about, like cultivating resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it easier to be persistent and resilient when I'm working inside of areas of the law that just I intuit better. And I think property and intellectual property are definitely areas of the law that I intuit better.
Mm-hmm.
When I've worked on areas like employment or real estate, those have been a little hard. Real estate is actually property, so that's probably a little bit easier for me. But like employment is one that I find very difficult because my gut instincts on what is fair and what is not fair do not align most of the time with what the law is. And I find it very challenging to sustain energy in that kind of work. It's absolutely important work, but what I guess I'm pointing at is that in finding areas that the law is designed or the people who are working in the law or the kinds of technology that's being touched by this law, if it's in an area where I feel like it's just naturally aligns with my gut on right and wrong, or at least what's fair or less fair, then I can be more resilient in that space. An area of the law that is not at all aligned with my gut, but I have to really cultivate resilience because it's important to me, is working with prisoners, really. So, like at the Prisoner Advocacy Network, where I'd been for a long time, we were working in a civil administrative law because it's once you've been put into prison, you're going to be subject to civil administrative law. It's not criminal law anymore. And so in that space, the scenarios are not at all aligned with what my gut tells me is fair or unfair. So that was really difficult. And I think in those spaces, it's about holding boundaries, which is something that I also find to be a challenge, but I know I'm in good company here. And it's just remembering to value that in order for you to do a good job helping somebody else like work through their problems, you have to have some energy. You have to feel good enough that you can help them. It's that whole concept of putting on the life mask in a plane, like you put it on your baby, you put it on yourself first, and then you
And
put it
then
on
you,
your baby.
mhm.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people they're like, oh wow, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, of course I would put it on my child first, but the idea is that if you can breathe, then you can make sure that the person with you can breathe. So I think that kind of mindset is not necessarily natural or intuitive, but if it's conscious, it can help you build resiliency. It can help you build the ability to stay persistent inside of a challenging area that doesn't align with your gut and you don't naturally get a lot of energy just working in that space. But if it's important to you, then you have to find ways to do that. And at the Prisoner Advocacy Network, one thing that we were really conscious of is to just make space for people to understand that a desire to help and a ability to stay and do work over a long period of time are not the same. And it's okay to want to help, but not be able to help. And it's actually the most important thing for people to say, I can't help anymore. And that's really, really hard to just know yourself and to be reflective of yourself and your energy levels and what you can and cannot do in order to be able to actually do what you can do effectively because you're not, for instance, letting an action, like a legal action, right? Oftentimes we have to start something with like a cease and desist letter, right? Well, if you have a cease and desist letter that you have to get out the door, it has to leave the door. If you just if you think about it on the back burner for like 3 months and it never actually happens, then you're not actually helping anybody, right? Because it's just been your emotional perspective as opposed to the actual actions that are needed. So
That's powerful.
yeah, it's not easy stuff, but it's like just having to sit with yourself and think about yourself and maybe not judge because I'm very naturally a self-judger. I think a lot of us high performers can be that way. And it's like, it's okay if you're in one of my friends, her name's Tava Scheffler. She actually she's actually at the Prisoner Advocacy as well, network as well. She talks about seasons. There are
Mhm.
seasons of people's life. Like you might come to work for a season in a space,
Mhm.
and it may need you may need to have a season off for a little while in order to come back to the work. And I think that's really important.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I remember being in a conversation with some policymakers years ago, and many were in agreement with me, and then one was sharply in disagreement. And that's okay. That's just the nature of engaging in discourse, right? To figure out what's the best course forward. And I humbly, not as an expert like these other folks were, but as an educator and a president of a college, I said, what about the idea of time off for police officers? These
Mhm.
folks witness horrific things on a regular basis. They have to be on and be sharp all the time. At some point, the spirit breaks.
It
I
does.
don't care how remarkable they are. And so, and then related to that, the nature of police officers, the actual legal term for their title is peace officer.
I know.
How about shifting? And I remember the one major detractor was like, if we do that, they won't be the edge that we need them to be, and blah 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 blah. And I'm thinking in my head, finally comes out of my mouth later in a way that was complementary to the discussion, not intended to negate that person who was a strong detractor against anything I said. I just humbly said, well, that's part of the reason why we have a lot of our problems. Yes, some people are, you can fill in the blank, whether racist, sexist, ageist, whatever they are, and they were
Mhm.
going out there to harm, and they're in these suits and they're betraying their oath, etc. And yet a significant number are doing the best they can, and they're human and don't realize that they've exceeded their limits. And
Yes.
so part of what I value about what you just said is the power of one to do sufficient. And you said not being judgmental, but we are judgmental, especially A type personalities, but
Mhm.
really doing self assessment, doing ongoing review of how one is mentally, spiritually, physically, and just overall, emotionally, and asking the question, am I still in the game? Am
Mhm.
I still passionate about this? Do I, is my intuition one of the highest mental tools I have? Does it demonstrate that I'm in alignment? And if I'm not, what do I need to do for myself? And the powerful thing is, Hannah, excuse me, I always say Hannah, is that
Nice
many of
either
us,
way.
yeah, many of us don't do that. We're so busy running, 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 running. And I remember listening to people and speaking with folks when COVID hit. They were so they were distraught for a number of reasons because they either lost their gig or they had so many people they were responsible for and they didn't know how to deal with it very well. But they were so relieved because they were slowing down. They
Mhm.
were forced to. They felt like they were literally they had jumped off a cliff and they didn't even know where the bottom was. So I appreciate you saying that you pay attention to some degree with to your intuition and understanding what space works better for you, where
Mhm.
you flow. I think the what do we are reminded of by those who are artists, whether they're sports athletes or they're dancers or they're creatives, we're reminded of the zone. And
Mhm.
those who are writers, those who are remarkable researchers like you, reminded of when you're in the zone, I mean, everything is clear. You don't even hear any noise. And that's the brilliance of self assessment and slowing down in order to be able to lean back in and take off.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm. This is a question I feel like I'm asking. No, I know I'm asking it with some bias in terms of results. Would you say that legal decisions are a combination of procedural, effective litigation, and political influences, or primarily procedural and effective litigation?
Well, I think if we're thinking at I guess it doesn't really matter what level we're thinking of. For sure, the Supreme Court, but honestly, at the trial court too. I think it's all three. The way that most people who are good litigators are going to try to solve a problem is they're going to try to solve it at the procedural level first, because as lawyers, we like knowing the rules, right? So we want to know what the box is and when we've stepped out of the box or where the box needs to shift a little bit. And so people will try to solve an issue on a procedural question first. But if you can't solve a problem on a procedural question, then it really matters how you're litigating. And that just means, how are you defining the problem and describing the problem and asking for relief from the court related to that problem. And if you define a question in a manner that or if you articulate a question in a manner that allows the court to answer it very broadly, then that's the place where the court you might see some political influence come in, right? Because judges are people too, jurors are people too. And so the answer is really all three, but it can be at different levels and depending on the type of question that's trying to be addressed. But I really think that like politics is a really big part of being a lawyer. If people are like pretending it's not, then I think they're just pretending, because politics matters. I mean, we're supposed to have a balance between all three branches of government. And I think that that indicate like the fact that there's three branches and that they go hand in hand with each other. Like
And for
politics
folks
is,
who may not know the three branches and who may be viewing from another country, the three branches are, of course, the president. Go ahead.
yeah, you've got Congress, the courts, and then we have the presidency. So, and what's the presidency and Congress? Of course, those are political, right? Nobody would disagree with that. But the fact that if we're looking at the Supreme Court level, which is actually the same in the states as well, like judges can be appointed, right? So someone that you've elected, the president at the federal level, is appointing judges across federal courts or the Supreme Court. And then Congress, for the Supreme Court as an example, is approving those nominees through a political process. And then once that person has been put on the court, now they're actually influencing the major culture, because a political process has put them into that position of power. And so the attorneys who are articulating questions or describing issues can influence. I mean, they're attempting to influence what the decision will be, and the skill in that space they can make it be a very narrow answer that the court can come up with, or they could ask questions or design the question in such a way that the court can come up with pretty much anything to make the answer. And so I think that it's really, I guess it's kind of like a pretzel. It's feeding into itself all the time, even though people sometimes act as though it's really not a political thing.
That's the importance of an attorney. And I didn't mean to cut you off, although I did, so my apology. The
No worries.
importance of an attorney understanding his leadership role in that space is essential, right? It's not just procedural. It's not just being able to be, as some people call it, an actor on the stage.
Yeah, it's not just razzle dazzling them.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I want to ask a question that I know very little about, and yet I was curious when I was listening to something you were sharing recently, and it's about Sequoia and contract disputes. Thinking about that in terms of this industry that you and your colleagues are working to influence in a way that works for businesses, legal businesses in the state of California, and having to deal with federal laws that indicate that certain things that are legal in California are illegal at the federal level. Talk a little bit about, explain Sequoia and explain one example of a strategy that you use to minimize or address or resolve a contract dispute. And I'm thinking in terms of your mindset, your leadership mindset, in addition to how you're able to do that with effectiveness.
Okay. So Sequoia, if I remember correctly, is the California Environmental Quality Act, I think, CEQA. And it's a very robust piece of legislation. It is, I want to say, growing out of I think it came out in the 70s in California. Yeah. And so there's the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Act at the federal level. The EPA is not as strong, and the teeth of the law, like we say that the law doesn't have teeth. So in California, Sequoia, the purpose of the legislation was to make a stronger environmental protections in California under California state law than the minimum standards at the federal level. So how this is playing out in the California cannabis industry right now is that water rights and like properly zoned locations for new farming and new manufacturing businesses, this all comes together under Sequoia, and Sequoia is actually a really robust agent. The agent, I think there's probably like 4 or 5 different agencies at least that operate under Sequoia in California, and they have different amounts of jurisdiction under it. Everything from like Fish and Wildlife to local. I think the local fire and sheriff departments can even have a role because they're out there on the ground doing local permitting in a lot of jurisdictions that are smaller, don't have as many people working for the government in them. So because this is a really strong area of legislation in California, there are people who are, already employed to do work in those spaces. And with California's cannabis industry, part of the problems is that there's regulations, there's laws that we know that we should be paying attention to, but there's nobody that you can call to say, hi, how can I comply with the law? Like, what is the system in place in this city or this county for me to be able to meet these requirements? And so Sequoia is an area where you can call people. There's a lot of people working in agencies that have power under Sequoia. So the nice thing is that you can call them and get answers. The flip side is that they're actually going out and inspecting sites and things like that. So what we see in contract disputes related to this is oftentimes people who are not being compliant with the environmental protection and water quality laws. And so it can be a place of strife with business owners where they're throwing allegations back and forth to each other, or they're like, why are you wasting resources? Or why are you actually committing a crime right now when we know this is a crime to steal water off of someone else's property, things like that.
Mm.
And that's how I see it. That's how the law is actually like creating issues for clients. When we're looking at contracts disputes, if you do have, for example, some sort of water dispute, then the contract issues are really like, who should have known that this was a problem, or whose responsibility is it to do this compliance work? And that's where when you're getting into negotiation, it's just important to make sure that you do have representation. A lot of people don't want to hire a lawyer, and that's totally fine. A lot of people are actually really okay at, or not even okay, they're good at actually negotiating their own contracts and issue spotting areas that are not in the contract yet that need to be added in to make sure that everything plays out well down the line. But for cannabis companies, that's just, it can be really difficult to have a starting point that actually it's not like you can go online and find a template, like the perfect template for a new cannabis company. If you find something out there, let me know, because I'd like to see what's in the template online. But it's so having an attorney come in here and who's aware of like all these different little areas that are going to affect the business that don't even really have to do with it getting a permit necessarily from the state, but just like that's where that traditional business acumen can come in and be really handy if people are not aware that these kinds of things are going to pop up. It's not just that you got a local permit. It's not just that you got a state annual license. It's that you actually have to be able to pass all the fire inspections at this property, and just like you would if you were making a cracker company. It's like, does that make sense? I'm not
Yes.
sure I had a
Yeah,
complete
yeah.
answer.
Yeah. You have your answer, and that's the important thing. What would you say from your humble perspective is, and this is not a fair question, especially since I led with the color of law. I looked at my little short set of books back there among my book library and saw this. What would you say is the real motivation for the legal system in this country historically, and compared to now, what you perceive it to be?
I think that the real motivation for anything, I think, is resources. Now we call those resources money, but in the past, maybe it was just making sure that you had a shelter and some food in your smaller community. I think that phrase "follow the money" is pretty on point. So I think if you follow the money, if you just keep following it, if you can see where the money's going, which is like a whole nother question. But if you can see where the money's going and you follow it, you'll be able to find some motivations. But generally, I think our culture, this moment in time, I think our capitalist culture is is taking the machine of our laws, our law system. It's just kind of going, and there's a lot of politics happening on the side there that it's hard to even understand sometimes, like what the other side of the aisle is doing, or whichever side you're on. It's sometimes not clear, like how to even engage with them and get the machine to kind of slow down a little bit. But I think it's this pretty much behemoth right now that like the incentives are just, they're not designed for people to I mean, the fact that we have billionaires, we have a billionaire class in our planet is pretty crazy. You know, that's just like, it's hard to see why, it's hard to see how to stop continuing the creation of billionaires with like the way that our capitalist society is set up right now. And knowing that is maybe a little bit more comforting, at least for me. Like, it's not like some bad actor who's just really wanting to keep, you know, people of color down in this like intentional way. I think that absolutely in the past and currently there are people who have really bad motivations, but I'm thinking just the system as itself. It doesn't seem like it's as easy as we could say like, oh, well, our emperor has been making bad choices for a while. You know, it's like a lot of people doing a lot of different stuff at the same time. And it just keeps going and going and getting bigger.
You
So
shared a lot there. I that's what you just shared is like another hour.
yeah,
When you
sorry.
say, historically, you know, the obvious is, yes, the system was designed to advantage some over others.
Hmm.
Now it just seems like the system is on I'm paraphrasing and maybe
Hmm.
not very well, so correct me. It's operating on steroids and it's moving independent
Hmm.
of most folks. And the degree to which people have resources, they, especially billionaires, they get to influence it the most. Is that
Yes.
a nice way of summarizing what you said? I
Yes.
don't know if it's a nice way, but a way.
I think it's a
And
good summary. Yeah.
yeah, and I won't be surprised that there will be many more billionaires in the future,
Hmm.
many, and actually trillionaires in the future because of the nature of our current systems and the momentum that's there. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I love when people disagree with me. I don't think there's inherently anything wrong with billionaires or trillionaires. What I think is inherently challenging is having whether it's a worldwide commitment, beginning with our own country, saying we commit to everyone having the basics, whatever it is: clean air, quality, access to quality, clean food, not filled with toxins, the ability, and so many reasons why health disparities continue to grow widely is because of economics in part, but also in terms of what we do as large organizations that have shifted the nature of climate and the use of our soil, et cetera. And so people don't have access to quality food that they can even grow because of local conditions, et cetera. So what am I really saying? I just wonder, and it's an open question, and it's a rhetorical question, so it's not for you to answer, but you may want to weigh in a bit. Um, what's the real motivation for us as a human species? That doesn't make sense to a lot of folks. Why would you ask that question? I wonder, what is the real motivation? And I ask that broadly, Hannah, because I wonder if we chose to stop today and think big, think about all of us on the planet, every one of us, and then eh, receive the fact that we're interconnected. Humbly speaking, I think we're all one, but the facts from biology, from science, from any reasonable person who's done the work, gathered the facts, we need each other. If we just slowed down and just did that for a moment. Yes, I understand there's a desire to control. And so you've got the Putins of the world. There's a desire to do something else. So you've got the folks in the continent of Africa who are doing things, who are throughout Europe, who are in the continent of Asia. You can just go to all different hemispheres of this planet, including in the US, where there's a desire to control because there's a sense, I think, fundamentally, that there's finite resources. But
Hmm.
what if there's enough? What if there's enough? And it requires that we change our paradigm. It requires that we change the mindset itself to begin with, to see that there's enough for everybody. What if we could see that our needs can be best served by serving the needs of everybody else? What, what if we just stopped everything for an instant, almost like COVID demanded?
I agree with you. I agree. I totally agree. I think that you're right. I don't know where to even start thinking about why we have a needy mindset as a culture, but I do think that there is, I think if you look at other cultures, I'm a little bit more well versed in like Scandinavian type stuff. But you know, they're social democracies. I don't think that the average Scandinavian is going, or the average like Norwegian person is feeling that there isn't enough to go around for everyone in their country. There's definitely going to be people who, you know, fit that bill, but generally, like people understand, like, no, actually, education is great for all of us. If the billionaires are a little bit less in number, or even if they're billionaires, but they're just like smaller number billionaires because they do still pay taxes, things like that, it does help everybody. I think raising the floor, and I think that's maybe my perspective personally on like what is worthy of my time and attention. I like to raise the floor up,
Mm.
right? Like I think everybody should have access to potable water, and I think internet should be a human right at this point. Like I don't know how people can function without it. And you know, it's interesting to look around how like the most Americans have a microwave and a cell phone. And wow, like that's really different from only 60 years ago, you know? And it's a lot of people in the world don't have electricity. So it does feel like there's lots of resources to go around, and we're doing pretty well in the US generally, even with our child hunger issues, even with our homelessness issues, even with our prison industrial complex. Like people are doing well, and it's looking around, it's like, yeah, we don't need to have such a zero sum outlook. Like an abundance
Mhm.
is working for us, like.
Mhm.
And maybe our cultural perspective of like needing to pull ourselves up from our own bootstraps and really prove ourselves got us to where we are today, but that doesn't mean that same mindset is going to continue to serve going forward.
Yeah,
So
and the reality is that too many people didn't have boots, let
mhm.
alone straps,
And you didn't
uh,
do it
and
yourself
had
either,
symptoms.
right? It
Yeah,
was
and
everybody
no
around
no
you.
one of us does it ourselves, although there are a lot of folks who are successful said, "I did it on my own." No, no one does it on his or her own. You needed
Yeah,
something that someone else created in order to do what you did.
yeah.
But, you know, humbly speaking, yeah, and there are those. I was having a conversation with, a brilliant woman yesterday after speaking with her husband, who's also brilliant. And she's talking about, she directs a funeral home, and she's talking about the folks who come in, and most of them are, are, are one, they're great people, yet they lack the resources to just bury their loved ones.
Hmm.
And we experienced that, you know, in remarkable ways during the height of COVID
Yeah.
pandemic. Uh, and and so there are people, and I was saying, well, stop buying potato chips, stop buying this, and invest in this. And she says, you know, some people, the potato chips is the only thing that makes them happy for the entire month. I'm like,
Hmm.
wow, just to understand uh, that we're in so many different ways. That's why I say the power of us stopping. I don't want another COVID-19 pandemic, but if that's what it takes to stop us all, to pay attention and to
Yeah.
decide who we want to be as a collective. Wow. Okay, that's my humble rant.
I liked it. Well said.
Um, well, Hannah, thank you for going deep in particular areas. And we don't just do this for those who are viewing at the time, who are looking at it through Roku TV, Amazon TV, or LinkedIn Live, or YouTube, or Facebook. We also do this for those who are going to be able to see it, who need to see it in the future, who don't have the time now to tune in. And so, for those of you, please take a look and listen at this, because I think there were a lot of little gems and some big gems. And most importantly, for those of you who are in the cannabis industry looking to make a remarkable difference in California, and as this systematically opens up across the country and becomes legal at the federal level, just know we value what you do that leads to quality products for those who need it for health reasons. I have a dear loved one who's transitioned. She needed it to ensure she wasn't in pain all day long. It was the only antidote. And then for those of you who create these beautiful designs using the cannabis, what do you call it? Hemp clothing. Oh my gosh, I just love the feel. So whatever you do that contributes in those and other spaces that provide a sense of comfort and well-being, I'm sure Hannah would say kudos to you, and leverage the legal system, but leverage the right people to help you leverage the legal system to ensure that you knock it out the park. You do it big and you serve the greater good. Any final words you'd like to share, Hannah?
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, if anybody I'm always wanting to connect people to good lawyers in the space. So it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. If you need legal help, even if I'm not the right person, and if it's not an intellectual property issue, it's not California, you can still feel free to reach out to me, because I'm happy to connect you to somebody in my network that can help you where you are with your project.
Could you share your phone number or your email address, however you'd like someone to reach out to you? Definitely you can find her on LinkedIn, and then Jethro can place it into the comment section.
Yes, the easiest ways to get a hold of me, if you want to go to my website, it's tectoniclaw.com, tectoniclaw.com. There's a contact page. You can send me a message there. And then my office phone number is 628-203-8479. And I think LinkedIn message also works. I think I've got my email in my about section. So any way that works for you.
Awesome. We're going to add that to the permanent video so that folks can leverage. And thank you so much, Jet. He's placed it in the comment section as well.
Sweet. Thank you.
It's an honor. Thank you for choosing to be in a space that I know some attorneys fear because of the federal, what they consider to be federal consequences, negative consequences. And yet you're leading and you're helping them understand how to lead with distinction in service to the greater good, but definitely their immediate clients, the business leaders and individuals who want to become business leaders. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you, audience. Thank you, growing number of people who are about the business of leading with distinction, and LEAD stands for Leadership Excellence and Achievement on Demand. And we value all that you do, whether we are familiar with it or we never get to meet you. Make your difference. Be the CEO of your life and continue to pay it forward. Wado.